I'm Steve McAllister, and this is the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. There's a proverb about one person's loss being another person's gain. While we're fairly certain Samuel Taylor Coleridge wasn't linking the expression to placing a pound on a wager way back when, the English poet's words ring true when we look at the year that's been in Ontario's regulated sports betting and online gaming market. Ravelry and Casumo are two of a handful of operators which left the province this past winter. A crowded house that still remains with 44 operators, plus OLG, did not deter Goldrush Gaming Group from launching its BetNova's sportsbook and iGaming product in April. Goldrush is also among 47 operators to have registered to operate in Alberta's incoming regulated gambling industry, which is set to launch next month. Dwain Powell has been Goldrush's online director since April 2023, and he's making his debut today on the Gaming News Canada show. Dwain, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Steve, for having me.
Hey, Dwain, I want to start, most of the guests we have on this show kind of have their own fascinating stories of working in the gambling industry and getting to where they are today. And in your case, you started your career as a casino table supervisor. Can you kind of take us back to what got you into that line of work and kind of your career path since then?
So I finished school in 2001, giving away my age there, but wanted to go off and study. And my father was like, no, you need to get into the workforce. So I was like, okay, perfect. And there were applications opening up at the casino near where I was staying at the time. It's about an hour south of Johannesburg. Started off as a croupier and then moved up to supervisory position on the tables. From there, I went to Monte Casino within Joburg. From there, I was off to Nigeria for a year. I worked in a casino there in Abuja. And then from there, I came to Goldrush. So that was 2011, if I remember correctly. Started at Goldrush as a general manager in one of our bingo branches.
Dwain, just, the emergence of online gaming and it's funny. It's not that when you think back, like I'm a little older than you are. You talk about your age. I mean, I graduated from university in 1981, so that. But it isn't that long ago where cell phones were a new thing. The internet was really just came along in 1995, and I just wonder when you as someone working in a casino, when iGaming first came along, like what were you a skeptic or did you see an opportunity there?
I think when we first came across iGaming was really with Pig's Peak back in South Africa. That was early 2000s. At that point, I think it was still illegal in South Africa, but the laws changed after that. But where it really started to take off was around COVID, around 2020, with the sort of the online sports betting really took off in South Africa. So at the time, I was still working sort of at the bingo branches, and we had obviously closed down due to COVID. And the CEO called me and said, listen, do you want to just join online, see if we can drive this business? And sort of hopped on, didn't really understand much about what online betting, and then kind of went from there. 2020, yeah.
Are there some best practices or kind of lessons that you learned from working at bricks and mortar casinos that you were able to take into the online business?
Yeah, I think the both the difference and the thing you can bring over is very much in the retail space and casino space. It's all about the customer, right? You're there, you're interacting with the client, you're busy chatting to them, you're taking them through their games, you get to learn a lot about them. And what I found when we first went on to online is you kind of get that distance between yourself and the client. And what we've been trying to achieve online, which has been quite difficult, but I think we've got somewhere, is to close that distance between it actually being a client-facing business and dealing with each client accordingly. So I think that's been the challenge, and I think that's where the experience from the retail is coming quite nicely.
Hey, I do want to talk about Ontario and Alberta in a minute, but I would love to get a sense from you of just what the South African gaming landscape looks like today. And, just in terms of Greater Africa, about a decade ago, I was involved with an international association of sports journalists, and I used to go to conferences around the world every year. And when I spoke with sports journalists from African countries, they talked about the challenges of the internet. Like, 10, 15 years ago, there were certain parts of Africa where there wasn't a whole lot of access to internet, and that was a challenge faced by journalists and an increasing digital media world. So I guess it's a two-part question. Maybe you can just tell our audience about what the South African gambling landscape looks like, and then has one of the challenges been infrastructure?
So the landscape here is we obviously have the National Gambling Board, which oversees everything, and then we have each of the provincial boards that then oversee their province. So you got Western Cape, Mpumalanga, Northern Cape, KZN, all of these boards. So each of the sports betting operators are licensed by a provincial board. So for an example, one of our brands are licensed by the Western Cape Gambling Board, and then you need to follow those rules. So I know when we went into Ontario, a lot of people were saying, these things are complicated, but I mean, yeah, we're dealing with essentially 9 different provincial boards, and you're having to deal with each of the different regulations in each of the different boards. So it's complicated, but I mean, we're from here, we work here, we've learned to deal with that quite well, actually.
I would assume that experience has been incredibly helpful with Canada, because again, Ontario, even though I think Alberta is working very hard to adopt the Ontario model, it's still, I'm sure when you came in Ontario, you've had a lot of experience, as you mentioned, with dealing with different sets of rules and regulations.
So Ontario has been a challenge. I think there was a lot to learn going through that process. But again, I mean, we're used to having to follow certain regulations, ensuring that the business runs accordingly, making sure that compliance is on board, and playing a real part in the operations, not just as a department that sort of sits one side. So it helped us with Ontario, but again, you're having to learn a new jurisdiction, new regulations, got a different board that you have to deal with. But I mean, they've been really helpful, and it's been I think quite successful so far.
What's the biggest challenge when you're coming into a new market, Dwain? Is it the compliance issue, or in Ontario there was some frustration, I think, in the early days with operators about the manual AML process, and there was a feeling that there needed to be more automated process around data, and that the technology that iGaming Ontario was providing wasn't up to snuff.
I mean, since we've been engaging with them now, I think properly now for about 2 years, the process has been a lot more smooth. They might have learned those lessons before we came on board, but I think with them now, it's been really smooth. They've asked us for certain things. The technology seems to be matching up with what they're requesting now. I mean, as you're aware, they've just implemented BetGuard, and that process was relatively seamless. I mean, with any technology, there's issues here and there, but I mean, it's been quite easy, actually.
I'll ask you quickly about BetGuard, Dwain, because there was a lot of, we've reported a lot on it in the newsletter and talked about it on this show over the last 4 years, and there seemed to be a real a sigh of relief or real satisfaction that iGaming Ontario finally launched a centralized self-exclusion program. Are you happy with the product as it sits today, and has it been an easy incorporation into your product?
Yes, it's been an easy incorporation into the product. I mean, we were only live barely a month, I think, when it came on board. So it's been relatively easy. I think it's something that was needed. I mean, even in South Africa, there's been a lot of talk around creating a central self-exclusion sort of portal that all the operators can plug into, because it protects I mean, if you've got 77 operators or 77 websites, the customer can quite essentially just hop from one operator to the next operator, and we're not really solving the problem that the client is saying, look, I have an issue here, please can you help? And I think across the industry, that really has a positive effect on both creating the trust with the client, but also making it easier from operators' point of view to ensure that when the client is asking for that assistance, we can give it on point.
Hey, Dwain, as I mentioned at the top, this is a highly competitive market. Obviously, a lot of big brands that people in Ontario had exposure to before the market launched in April 2022, whether they were, companies that were operating in the gray market in Canada or big, big American-based brands that we would have access to commercials and their product living here in Canada, and especially in Ontario. Like, what was the motivation for Goldrush to get in the Ontario market, given that, as I mentioned, I think when you guys entered the market, there were probably still around 47, 48 operators here.
So, I mean, again, I refer back to South Africa, but I mean, it's as competitive here. We have as many operators as going on here. We were also probably a little bit late to the game, per se, sort of late 2020, really entering properly. There were other operators that came in before, but I mean, I like a good underdog story, right? You can only fight your way up. So I think it's when you're on top, you got to stay there. So the competitive nature of entering Ontario was never really an issue for us. I think we bring a certain amount of skills that I think we can be competitive with the other operators that are there.
How do you differentiate yourself, say, from the big players like a Bet365, a FanDuel, a BetMGM? Like how does like you say, an underdog? How do you find your lane?
So I mean, we've had quite a lot of discussions around this, probably over the last year or so. I think that now with technology the way it is, and different operators are using different platforms. They've got different integrations in terms of CRM or payments or whatever it might be. But I think at the core of it, all the technology is essentially doing the same thing. So the differentiating factor or your IP is not really sitting on the technology side, but it's really sitting on the back end. So what are we doing for the clients on a daily basis? How are we making the journeys easy for them? How are we getting them through the thousands of games, and just like sort of creating a path of clarity in terms of this is what you need to be like. I don't know, it's difficult. I'll go back to the whole point of bringing the engagement with the client as if it was in sort of a casino. So I was sitting across from the client and having that conversation. It's bringing that online. And I think that's the differentiating factor with all operators is what are we doing in the back end to support the clients that choose to play with us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dwain, because obviously everybody's kind of offering the same online slots games or other online games are offering the same sports betting product for the most part. So it would seem to me the secret sauce is having something that's easy. Again, it kind of goes back to the basics of easy to register, easy access to the products, being able to get paid in a timely fashion, and then having access to customer service when and if there's a problem.
Yeah.
I just wonder, and I think the other thing too is, again, this part of this competitive marketplace, Dwain, and it looks like we're going to see this in Alberta as well, is that there's significant advertising and marketing dollars being spent. And I've been writing about this in the newsletter the month, and I think that's being further muddied here in Ontario by the avalanche of fake online casino ads that we're seeing on Instagram. So, again, if you're someone who maybe is playing on 2 or 3 different apps, and now you've got all these ads popping up on social media, how does Goldrush with this BetNova product? How do you cut through all that noise and put your product on people's radars?
The digital advertising currently is extremely competitive and expensive. And I think, again, it's if you get in front of the client, may that be their Reels, Facebook, or YouTube, whatever it might be, But if you get the opportunity to get the eyes onto your ad, the question is then, what are you doing? So I think that messaging becomes key. So how do we create the trust to be able to say, you can come to us, you can have a great experience, you're going to get everything you want, and sort of keep it positive? Because it's one thing attracting them, it's another thing to retain them on the website. And I think having a balance of that, maybe not going for too big a chunk too quickly, which then might cause problems and not give them an experience that you've now promised to them. And I think that holding that in balance the whole time, I think, is key. I know there's a lot of operators that are spending millions of dollars pushing advertising, but the underdogs, again, I feel like you can build up slowly and keep the experience consistent throughout for the client.
Is your iGaming platform ready for Alberta? Bede Gaming is ready to support your new market entry with a SOC 2 compliant platform, multi-tenant infrastructure model, and unlimited configurability. Future-proof your iGaming performance today with a solid foundation for your next province. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. One message I've had when speaking with people in the industry for 5 years now is that you don't have to come in and own the market. You could, like, there are companies that can come in and you mentioned there are small fish that can come in, and if you're grabbing a certain percentage of the market, especially if you're a global operator and like you have an existing business in South Africa, that if you can carve out a small piece of the pie and have a pretty good business running in a market like Ontario and Alberta. Is that a correct assessment?
I mean, to start off, yes. I think ultimately you do want a decent market share, right? You want to be competitive. You want to be playing with Bet365, Betways. These guys are the leaders in the industry, really, and you want to compete with those. So would we call it ego? Perhaps. But I think it's just been in a competitive space. You want to be competitive. You want to be one of the top brands. You want to be recognized, and you want clients to kind of have that trust across borders to say that this brand, regardless if it's Ontario, Alberta, South Africa, Botswana, whatever it might be, that the brand is consistent across the board.
Hey, Dwain, just going back to the decision to come in Ontario, like I wonder, like what went in that decision? Like when did it get to the point where you and others at Goldrush said, okay, Ontario's a market that we want to be in? And or was it a case where you mentioned we know there are operators that getting registered by the AGCO and getting the iGaming Ontario license can be a long process at times, but I wonder what the motivation was to enter this market.
I think we've always wanted to expand globally. Ontario seemed like a great start to that. I mean, at that point, it was just sort of starting out. It was a young market. And I think starting that process here or in Ontario, I speak as if I'm there, but starting it over there, I think, was the logical option. A lot of the other countries, were still changing regulations and legislation, and from 1 month to the next month things were different and it seemed a bit more complicated. Ontario just seemed like they had sort of what they wanted from the operators was clear. So we decided, and we did market research and said, no, look, let's go Ontario. This is the market we want to enter into firstly as our expansion started.
I think for some operators, Dwain, the early comers here in 2022, their arrogance might be too strong a word, but I think there was a feeling that you could come into the Ontario market and basically bring your advertising that you had done in the US or European countries, or you could bring, a sports betting product, for example, that wasn't tailored towards a Canadian sports bettor. And I just wonder, what your approach was, and was there a recognition that this market is unique, just like I'm sure your markets in South Africa. It's a different landscape for gamblers than it would be, say, in Spain or the UK.
Yeah, so a lot of people believe that they can copy and paste across borders, right? And I mean, we South Africans, we have a South African business, we understand South Africans, we're born and bred. But like taking that model to Ontario is not going to work. So what we did initially and how we started off was to ensure that we had what would be the correct Canadians. Let's call them Canadians for now. So you had Canadians that we had invested within our business and our shareholders within our business. Also, to ensure that we understood what the Canadian market wanted, what were their needs, what the website need to look like for them. And I think that was the important part. We can't take our model here and put it into Canada. It's completely different. So having local staff, local shareholders, and having feet on the ground within Ontario is important, because it has to be an Ontarian business and made for Ontario. Is Ontarians the right? Is that correct?
Yep, you got it. You got it. Yep. With those boots on the ground, I don't expect you to give out state secrets on the show, but what does that presence look like? Is it just a case of having some customer service representatives in Ontario, or do you have some product people? Like what's that look like?
So essentially, a big part of our management team sits within Ontario. Compliance, we also have marketing, and then a country manager as well.
The other question too, Dwain, I think again, I think some of us, myself included, look, sports betting is kind of the shiny object. And I think when the data first started coming out from iGaming Ontario, and we saw, I think at the beginning it was like 80% of handle in Ontario was coming from online from iGaming, and sports betting was about 10 or 11%. And now I think 85% of handle in the market here is online gaming. Is that something that you were following closely, and has that had any impact on your strategy and what you're offering customers here?
No, I think it's pretty much expected. It's kind of gone that way everywhere, really. Okay. There's only a few markets now where sports still dominates, but iGaming has been forefront. So our website is designed in such a way that iGaming is put up front, but of course we still want a competitive and really easy to use sportsbook as well, just to cater for the 15%.
You mentioned that Ontario was kind of the first market outside of South Africa that Goldrush has explored, and I think that's been a similar story with other operators. And I just wonder, we've watched how difficult it's been for U.S. states to legalize iGaming, and I wonder if that's even going to be more difficult now, given the prediction markets issue in the U.S. Was that part of the attraction around Ontario, that it was a regulated sports betting and iGaming industry that they were offering?
Yes. The thing is that iGo and both AGCR and iGo have been very open. They're willing to sit down and have a conversation. You get a better understanding of the market. A lot of the iGaming licenses now that you're applying for is very much an online application. You kind of find your own way, and if you've got questions, you don't really have anywhere to put those questions. But with Ontario, I find them to be very open from day one to offer assistance and to sort of guide you through the process, which I found helpful, really.
Yeah. How are the results been for BetNova so far in Ontario?
It's not been bad. It's been a slow start, but I think we sort of just getting our foot in. Of course, you can plan as much as you want, but once you switch the website on, you can always find that some issues creep through. But we sort of getting on top of those, and it's been, compared to other sites that we've opened, it's been quite successful. But now is kind of the groundwork that needs to be laid, and then we can build from there.
And Dwain, is it, when you launch in a new jurisdiction, like, I wonder, is it almost a case where you take a soft launch approach, and maybe you're kind of keeping your powder dry in terms of advertising and marketing spend, that you want to make sure your product's compliant, you want to make sure it's working quite well, you're getting feedback from your customers, and then a few months down the road, then you start to invest in advertising and marketing dollars?
Yeah, so we've started advertising, albeit a bit small at the moment. But I think for me, the important part was just to get the operations operating properly. Because I mean, we've got reams of policies and procedures and all things. But once you go live, you're kind of like, oh wait, well, what's going on here? And you have to fix it. And for me, the important part is you can go market, you can go spend a couple of million and get the customers in. But the minute they're within your operation, they're very quickly going to realize that certain things are not the way that they should be. And really what I want to do is lay the foundation so that when we start advertising, really pushing money towards that, is that when the customer comes, that the experience, again, that we're promising from a marketing point of view is the same experience that they're going to have when they land on our website.
You know, we've read a lot of coverage leading up to the World Cup of Soccer that for operators, it's an opportunity to get new to get new customers, and I just wonder for Goldrush, is that part of your strategy not only in Ontario but in Africa as well?
Yeah, so any football league really that's going on, including the World Cup, is generally a good time for us. We do find that it's perhaps not actually as busy than when, say, the Premier League or the Spanish League is up and running. The World Cup is very much a different type of customer that might come through for that. It does get a bit more interesting sort of when we get down to the round of 16. But yeah, I mean, we run a couple of promotions around that, but it's not a massive push for us.
Yeah, I've got to ask you, we're recording this podcast on Thursday, June 18th, the morning after the DR Congo tied Portugal 1-1 and Ghana scored an extra time to beat Panama. Like, are those games popular with your customers in South Africa?
Yeah, no, everybody's watching. Yeah, the games are either like very early in the morning or late at night for us. So a few of us are looking a bit tired, but yeah, it's always good fun.
Obviously, responsible gaming is a hot button topic. It certainly is Ontario. I mean, it seems to be around the world. I mean, our coverage in the newsletter every week, we aggregate coverage from around the world, and I just wonder, like, what is Goldrush's philosophy on responsible gaming? Kind of what are you doing, and are the policies in Ontario around responsible gaming, are they different at all than what you have in South Africa?
They are very different to what we have in South Africa, but I think ultimately, I mean, if there's a regulation around it or not, it's important that we implement these things. It's important for the client, it's important for the business. We don't have a business without the clients, and in order to have these clients, we need to be looking after them. I think it's an obligation from an operator's point of view, and I think we take that quite seriously. Each of the different jurisdictions have sort of different ways of looking at RG, but ultimately, if our philosophy internally is that this is what we want to do, this is how we want to look after the customer, to really comply to that is not too much of an issue. It's really just adjusting maybe slightly the mechanics of what we need to do internally to adjust for each of the regulations. But I think our philosophy has always been that, we got to look after the clients, ensure that they can continue to bet and play with us safely over a period of time.
There's been a lot of criticism, of the regulated industry, that not enough's being done around responsible gaming. How fair is that criticism? And I think sometimes it gets missed by people who aren't, they're not gamblers or they aren't following the industry, that there are a lot of RG mechanisms in place once you register for an account. But do you think the criticism's fair?
I think there has to be some criticism. There can always be more that can be done. So I think it's important. Like, we can't just accept and say this is all we can do and we should move on from this point and here and no further. I think that it has to be a continuous discussion, both with the regulators and operators as a whole, to ensure that we continually, because technology changes, and so the ways in which we can monitor these things and improve on them should always be sort of what we can do. So could we do better? Yes. Do I think criticism is unfair? No, I don't think so.
Dwain, before I let you go, I want to ask you about Alberta, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that I think Dale Nally and the provincial government, and now Dan Keane and his team at the Alberta iGaming Corporation, I think have created a model that's quite a bit like in Ontario. I think there have been some lessons learned from Ontario. There is going to be an automated AML system in place when the market opens in July. There will be a centralized self-exclusion program in place. There's a little bit of tweaking around the advertising and marketing rules. I just wonder what's the process been like for Goldrush so far in getting a license for Alberta.
So we've got a temporary license, I think it is now, but we're going through sort of the process of just adjusting what we've done in Ontario now for Alberta. As you said, that there's certain changes around the marketing, the AML automation, essentially their version of BetGuard. So it's just changing that up slightly to accommodate for those compliance changes, essentially.
What are the biggest pain points for you and your team when you're going through this process? I know there's something I think in Alberta, I believe there's a SOC 2 process, and obviously I think right now you're testing if you're someone who's hoping to launch in July, you're already testing systems and that to be compatible with the regulators in Alberta. But what are the things that kind of have you and your team pulling your hair out when you're trying to get ready for a product launch?
Everything. Making sure everything is ready with the boss asking you about the deadline. But again, I mean, we've met with the AIGC quite regularly to sort of touch base, make sure that we're heading in the right direction. I mean, even if we're just steadily moving in the right direction is good. I think the biggest mistake you can do now is run off in a direction and only find out later that direction was completely wrong and then having to redo everything. So it's been steady progress, but I'm sure that's going to ramp up as the due date creeps up on us.
And is there some learnings of the market that you have to go through? Like, again, people in Alberta and Western Canada will tell you it's a different market than Ontario. Dale Nally, the Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction, has said that there's a very robust gambling base in the province there. Like, I assume there's some research that goes into a new market.
Yeah, we have to do our market research. I mean, we can say Canada is one country and everybody's the same there, but again, we have provinces in South Africa, and if you speak to people here, people in Gauteng are not the same as people in KZN or Cape Town or whatever. There are nuances within the country, and I think we need to be able to adjust to those nuances.
Hey, Dwain, last question. Is there a timeline? Like, are is it your goal to be ready to launch on July 13th?
That's the goal, yeah.
That is Dwain Powell, the online director of Goldrush Gaming, owners of the BetNova product in Ontario, and for Dwain, hopefully on July 13th in Alberta. Hey, Dwain, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the World Cup, and I wish you and your team the very best in getting ready for Alberta.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate your time.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada Show presented by Bede Gaming. As always, you can listen to the show on the various podcast apps. You can also watch my conversation with Dwain on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Thank all of our listeners and viewers for supporting this podcast, and we will see everybody again very, very soon.